Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is ScopeSF and today we got a little bit of a treat in the new Magic the Gathering set, The Brothers' War. I'm not the first person to notice this, I'm not the first person to talk about this, but I want to be one of the first people to do anything about it. And that is, as most of you know, between the decks that I posted so far, I am primarily a Persist combo player. And I'm not going to go into this, I've gone over Persist Creature, things that fight counters, and Sacrifice Outlets, 3-part combo to win the game. Very straightforward stuff. But because of how specific the requirements are for a Persist combo deck, and therefore the cards that can go into it are, it's very rare that we get a new card that is very groundbreaking and can change up the Persist archetype pretty much overnight, and actually makes a contribution to any sort of type of deck. It has to be a very unique card, one with very intentional design, and you just... now granted, all Magic cards have a home, all of them are pretty good, but when it comes to this specific archetype, you don't just get those types of cards. Usually you get something that might be a good support for the deck, but nothing that is inherently a requirement. But in Brothers' War, we got a new enchantment. A new enchantment called Thran Vigil. Whenever one or more artifact and or creature cards leave your graveyard during your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. The reason that this works is because Persist is... most people don't know this. Persist is actually a death trigger. It's not... because it says return it to the battlefield, yes, it does have an enter the battlefield effect, but it also interacts with the graveyard, because when it says when this creature dies, as in when this creature goes to the graveyard, so it has to go to the graveyard first. Then it says return it to the battlefield, which does imply that while it was in the graveyard, it is leaving the graveyard to enter the battlefield. That's why Thran Vigil ultimately works, because Persist itself does trigger the creature card leave your graveyard. And then, because Persist must resolve first, your Persist creature is coming back with a -1/-1 counter on it. And as you're allowing that to resolve first, that means that the Persist creature is already back on the battlefield with the -1/-1 counter on it before Thran Vigil actually checks to... before that trigger actually goes off. Which means that your Persist creature is a valid target for the +1/+1 counter, as it is a creature that you control. So, for all intents and purposes, the wording is a little bit different, and this card isn't necessarily completely perfect, because all of this has to be done on our turn. And if there's any instant speed interaction between... after your Persist creature is put back onto the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it, and Thran Vigil's effect being on the stack, if there's any interaction to destroy your Persist creature, then your Persist creature is dying with that -1/-1 counter on it, so it doesn't just come back like it otherwise would with... all the other different types of decks, your Vizier of Remedies, your Solemnity, your Anafenzas, your even your Metallic Mimics in this deck. The +1/+1 counter part resolves along with the creature entering the battlefield, so there's no instant speed interaction there. So so Thran Vigil isn't exactly perfect. However, the fact that we have a card that is this efficient, especially compared to what we had before in Mono Black, with Mikaeus the Unhallowed doing just some weird janky stuff because he gives all creatures Undying for 6 mana, I believe was his total cost. The fact that we have a card that, for all intents and purposes, does the same thing for at least a third of the mana cost, that's huge. It's so huge that it finally makes Mono Black viable, just for the combo part of it alone. And a thing to know about Persist, if a color is viable on its own, then it is equally, if not more viable, when paired with something else. So the fact that mono black can stand on its own 2 feet now, we can start to look at other things, such as green black or black white. And I think that's what's making Thran Vigil so revolutionary. Yes, we're only looking at the mono black version right now, or at least like my updated version of the mono black version. But there are so many other ways that we can implement Thran Vigil into this type of archetype that it's a good card. At the end of the day, this is just a very good card. So, now that we have our core Persist package, we can start building around it. And it's, there are plenty of ways to take a black deck, because essentially you have to have a land base that should be at least 20 lands. We do have that here. I'll get into that in a moment. But then afterwards, like, let's say you have your core Persist package. Let's say it looked more like this. So you got, your set of Persist creatures, and you have about 20 lands. So you have all this. You have about 12 flex slots to go whatever you want, give or take. If there were other cards that you could add to the Persist combo, you could do that. That's kind of the route that I went with my green-red Persist combo. I doubled down more on cards that could improve counters. I have more Persist creatures than this version, but essentially, you do have some flex slots that you can play with, and it's up to you how you want to fill that void. For this particular deck, I decided to take some Pauper tech, because if you've seen my channel and you've follow around with Pauper, there is a deck going around called Mogwarts, which realistically is just the Persist combo in action. It's a little bit more to it than that. It relies heavily on like a goblin theme, which is actually very relevant. Like, if some of the cards in that deck weren't actually goblins, then the whole deck would fall apart and it just wouldn't actually work properly. But with Mogwarts, one thing that they do is, aside from having multiple pieces of this that kind of do the same thing within the deck, it also runs this cute little package here, because all of these cards are commons as well. You have Ichor Wellspring, just an artifact that when it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and then when it leaves the battlefield, draw a card. And then you have 4 copies of Deadly Dispute, where you can sacrifice an artifact or a creature. And this one lets you draw 2 cards. And then there are other cards that are kind of like this, but they have different effects. Costly Plunder doesn't exactly have any additional effects. Deadly Dispute, this one creates a treasure token, which is probably why this is the best of the bunch. But then also from Kamigawa, which I think nobody really talks about this as a potential upgrade, because Neon Dynasty came out after Mogwarts hit its peak popularity in Pauper. But since then, Reckoner's Bargain came out, which is the exact same thing. 2 mana, black instant, as an additional cost to the sacrifice an artifact or creature. Draw 2 cards, so it already does the exact same thing that otherwise does. But you also gain life, equal to the sacrifice permanent's mana value. So if you do this and sacrifice an Ichor Wellspring, then you're getting 2 life in addition to drawing a total of 4 cards. Because you get the first card by playing Ichor Wellspring, and then next turn you spend 2 mana to do Reckoner's Bargain. You're drawing 2 cards off of Reckoner's Bargain, and then you're already drawing a 3rd card from sacrificing the Ichor Wellspring because it's going to the graveyard. So between these 2 cards, you're getting 2 life and drawing 4 cards. So this is a very, very fast way to cycle through your deck and finding, kind of force drawing your way through your deck to find the combo pieces that you're looking for. It's also a really good way to rebuild your hand. It's if somebody sees, like if you get thought seized or something, and they see that you have a putrid goblin and even a blasting station, they're probably going to take one of those two cards, because the Persist combo isn't exactly hidden information. It's pretty obvious what you're trying to do, but they also have to work around the fact that you can redraw into the pieces that you need. And because you're drawing more cards than you're spending when you go this route, you are refilling your hand. So all of a sudden, you're back at a card advantage because they tried to use their cards to not necessarily create an advantage, but they're trying to disrupt your game plan, and that's the advantage that they would be getting. If you use this package to refill your hand, so now you're back up on card advantage, but you're also preventing them from receiving the advantage that they're trying to get by forcing you to discard your hand, all of a sudden, you're back in the game. And that's not even... This is still pretty viable within this deck, just to force your way through the deck to more consistently reach select copies of these cards. And ultimately, the reason I chose to go this route, I think you could make a much better deck, is if instead of this sort of forced card draw package, you went with like your Duress, Inquisition, Thoughtseize, which I have in the sideboard. I'll get to that in a moment. You could have a better deck by putting your own disruption package in the main board, and then having really, really good stuff in the sideboard, like maybe like a Murder or a Walk the Plank, or whatever that other one was, the better Walk the Plank, the one that does non-werewolf, non-vampire, non-zombie, I think is what it was. I forget what the card's called, but it's better because it's an instant, even though it has the same cost. Basically, Black has a lot of really good sideboard cards, and you could fundamentally make a really good sideboard with this disruption package if you used it instead of the force draw here. But there are two reasons why I did go with this force draw package. The first one is that I think it's actually really, really fun. It's just a feels-good moment when you're able to consistently draw a lot of cards, and you're able to dig through your deck, and you're able to see more of it, and now you have more options, now that you have more cards, to plan around what your next move is going to be. And it just feels a lot more, I don't know, lively. It feels like, even though you're not necessarily doing something with the deck, that the fact that you're able to see more of it and have the option to do more with it just makes it feel more valuable in a way. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it other than that. I think it just feels good to be able to draw cards, and this is a great card draw package. The other reason is because, I don't know if you got onto this, I mentioned that this was Pauper Tech, which means that all these cards were commons when they were printed. You can see that here. Common, common, common. Which means that they're dirt cheap. And lo and behold, Putrid Goblin is also a common. Lesser Mastercore is an uncommon. Murderous Redcap is an uncommon, and Thran Vigil is an uncommon that was just printed. So a vast majority of your deck is going to be commons and uncommons. The real exceptions to that, I mean, we'll ignore the land base for a second here. You got some mythics here, but I'll touch on that in a second. Other than those commons and uncommons, yes, Metallic Mimic is a rare. Yes, Altar of Dementia is a rare. And Blasting Station is an uncommon, but it was only printed in 5th Dawn and desperately needs a reprint. And it's just a little bit harder to find. So these three sets of cards, the Metallic Mimic, Altered Dimension, Blasting Station, they're going to be a bit more expensive. And if I bring up my deck list here, you can see that. So, you got your Deadly Disputes. So $5 for 4 copies. They're a little bit over $1 each. Ichor Wellspring, also just slightly over $1 each. But Reckoner's Bargain, only 28 cents a piece. And then same thing for the Putrid Goblin. That's even cheaper. That's 21 cents a piece. Even some of the uncommons, like your Lesser Mastercore, that's cheaper than the Putrid Goblin. And then you got your, what was the other one? Thran Vigil. This brand new card that is changing up the game entirely and is an uncommon. Yeah, it's only 16 cents a piece. Where you get the expensive cards. So you got your Metallic Mimic, which about $7 a piece. If you're looking for a playset, that's about $30. Same thing for Blasting Station, about $30. And Altered Dementia, about $30. So for these sets of cards that I'm running, you're looking at $90 minimum. And that's, of course, ignoring the big land base. But after those $90, so you're probably looking at about $100 for running the deck. If you're not running the expensive lands and you're just running swamps, that's fine. And then when it comes to the sideboard, I have the Duress, Inquisition, Thoughtseize, and Eternal Scourge. A lot of these are really dirt cheap. These are about, between the Duress, Eternal Scourge, and Inquisitions, those are maybe about $6 total. But because Thoughtseizes are about $20 a piece, that's another $80. So just with the sideboard there, you're looking at $85 on top of the $100 to $260, depending on how you're looking at your land count and everything like that. But a lot of these upgrades are just kind of really, really nice. Out of the cards that I've been talking about that have the higher price tags, literally only the Metallic Mimic here that costs $30 for a playset, that's the only one that I am demanding is absolutely necessary. The rest of the deck can be built around very budget alternatives. And to show that, let me prove it. I have a slightly altered list here. And as you can see, if you're, it's the exact same 75 cards total, and they essentially do the same thing between the different types of decks. You got the full Persist, you got the exact same Persist creatures. You have the Thran Vigil and the Metallic Mimic. The difference is the sacrifice outlets. If you're going to do the budget version, I like to run a combination of Devouring Swarm and Zulaport Cutthroat. Instead of $60 for a playset of Blasting Station and a playset of Altered Dementia, you're looking at, let's say, $3.50 and then 60 cents. So just a little bit over $3 compared to $60. That's less than, what is that? It's like about, that's a little bit less than 5%. Okay, maybe a little bit over 5%. It's like 6% of what the original cost differential there would be. And the deck still works. And also, you're not really messing up the mana base either, because Blasting Station was 3 mana, just like Devouring Swarm. And yes, Devouring Swarm has a color requirement, but lo and behold, the only color required is black. Same thing for Zulaport Cutthroat. The only color requirement is black, and being in a mono black deck, that's very easy to pull off. The reason that I would recommend these as the budget alternatives is because Devouring Swarm is a creature that gets flying. Is a creature that already has flying. So it has built-in evasion. And you buff it up by continuously sacking over and over again. So if you're going this budget route, probably your ideal play, if you can afford it, is turn 3. You're going to place down a Devouring Swarm, and you just need it to survive one turn. turn 4, you play your land drop, and then you have one of your 2 cards that cost 2 mana to prevent or to add the +1/+1 counters to prevent the persist thing from being a lockout. And then you have your Putrid Goblin and Lesser Masticore for the other 2 mana as your persist creature. So then you just do the loop, sacrificing to Devouring Swarm. So all of a sudden this 2/1 flyer becomes a 28/27 flyer. And then you just swing them for 28 damage. And then just win on the spot. Because evasion is still really, really good in Magic. And that's the reason that I like the Devouring Swarm personally, is because it has that built-in evasion. None of the other cards have that. Carrion Feeder doesn't have that. Nantucket Husk and Phyrexian... I forget what the other one is, but it's literally just Nantucket Husk with another name and a different artwork. But those do not have any evasion built into them. Vampire Sovereign is a cheaper card. It's only 1 mana and 1 black. 1 generic and 1 black. But that does not have any evasion built into it. This is the only one. So if you're going to win with combat damage, this is the one that you want to go with. Now, let's say you don't win with combat damage. For whatever reason, they have their reaches, they have their own flyers. What are you going to do? Well, if you can get out both Devouring Swarm and Zulaport Cutthroat, every time you sack a creature to the Devouring Swarm, the Zulaport Cutthroat will trigger. So yes, granted, unlike the Alter Dementia or Blasting Station, where you will win with one or the other alone, you do need both the Zulaport Cutthroat and Devouring Swarm you need the Devouring Swarm to actually make the Zulaport Cutthroat work, even though Devouring Swarm can work on its own. But then you just deal infinite non-damage to them until they're dead. So that's what I like about this, is that it's a very budget-friendly alternative. And between trimming down the lands to only having swamps, which is really all you need in a mono black deck, and cutting out some of the pricier things, we went from, what was it, $260? Yeah, we went from literally $260 to just above $60. This is even less than the $100 mono white version that MTG Goldfish was really excited about when they first did their deck tech. They're saying, oh, here's an infinite combo that you can get in Modern that's only $100. What a steal. What a bargain. This is super budget. Yeah, this is super budget. This is practically a Pauper deck, which I really believe can just hold its own in Modern. And considering we're talking about a deck that, I don't know, I personally think is fun to play, but because the cards are Modern legal and they will just last you a lifetime, yeah, $60 is absolutely worth the investment. And then talking a little bit about the sideboard, originally I had Thoughtseize, which was like $20 a piece, and that made the entire sideboard like $85-ish. Just use Collective Brutality instead, which has a little bit more versatility, because even though the discard part of it is a lot more limited because you can only choose instants and sorceries, which honestly isn't even that bad, because instants and sorceries are normally what your opponents will be using to destroy your artifacts, enchantments, and creatures, which is what the entire Persist combo is based around to begin with. But it also has the potential to kill a small creature, and it has a little bit of damage swinging for a total of 4, because not only is the opponent losing 2 life, you're gaining 2 life. And maybe that little bit of shock value can actually save the game for you. And you don't even have to worry about the Escalade cost, because, you know, with Escalade, yeah, you're discarding a card, but if you choose to side in Collective Brutality and you're not siding out your Ichor Wellspring, Deadly Dispute, Reckoner's Bargain package, then you can discard 2 cards in addition to playing Collective Brutality for all 3 forms, and you're going to build your hand back up. That's not going to be the problem at all. So, but yeah, other than Thoughtseize, you could run Collective Brutality, and all of a sudden that $85 sideboard just became a $17 sideboard. So what is that? 260 plus 85 is about 345. We'll say like 350 after taxes, fees, shipping, whatever. This is 62 plus 17. Let's bump this up to 63 just for math's sake. So 63 plus 17 is 80. After shipping and handling, you're talking about 85. So comparing those, yeah, the entirety of the budget version is about the price of just the sideboard of the expensive version, which I think is huge. So ultimately, I know I'm going over the math, I'm gushing over the numbers because that's just what I do, but the point I'm trying to make, if you were looking to get into Persist combo and you need a starting point with a deck that is easy to understand but still holds its own, can still win games within its own merit, Mono Black Persist just became a contender. If not the contender, as a prime starter deck. Just for the entirety of Magic the Gathering. No, it's not going to be like the prime starter deck. You could definitely do a budget Elves deck. You could definitely do a budget Counterspell Control deck. You could definitely do a budget Burn deck. But for a budget combo deck, for a starting player, this might just be the way to go. All because Thran Vigil was just printed, and that's the only thing that changed. And personally, I think that's super impressive. But now, just quickly going back to the deck itself, I already talked about the discard package, which you can just, kind of swap out these two. And it kind of turns it into a transformative deck, and if you know me, there are 2 things that I really love. I love Persist decks, surprise, surprise, and I love transforming sideboards, where all of a sudden you swap out cards in the sideboard and the deck plays completely differently. And the reason this plays completely differently is because you'll notice that this deck is chock full to the brim with 2-drops. And heaven forbid your most expensive card is a 4-drop that you don't necessarily need because you have plenty of 2-drops that fill its void. But you don't have any 1-drops with this version of the deck. So when you start off, if you're playing, if you're going first, even if you're going second, actually, it doesn't matter. If you're playing your turns, you're going to want at least 2 lands in your opening hand. So that way you can play a land and pass and not do anything on your first turn. And then play a land and then do something on your second turn. You're just kind of looking to gloss over your first turn, go to your second turn, that's when you start doing stuff. And it doesn't matter if you put down the Altar of Dementia to threaten the combo, or the Thran Vigil to threaten the combo, or the Petra Goblin, or Lesser Mastercore to threaten the combo, or if you put down the Ichor Wellspring to set up the aggressive card draw. There's plenty of stuff that you'll be able to do on turn 2 pretty much every single game, but you can never do anything on turn 1. And when your opponents see that, they think they're going to be safe turn 1. That, whether they're going first or second, that you're essentially giving them a free turn to reign with their deck. But if you swap out your Force Draw package that all cost 2 mana with your discard package, each of which cost 1 mana, now all of a sudden you absolutely have turn 1 plays that they were not expecting. And not only that, your turn 1 plays are putting you at the advantage that I talked about much earlier, where you're disrupting their hand and potentially getting rid of all of their hatred pieces that they would have bought in to fight your Persist combo. And that's realistically what all this is. With the reason I like green-red so much is because mostly with the green, it has a lot of very good artifact and enchantment removal, which artifacts and enchantments are usually the things that hurt your persist combo the most. If you're able to destroy those reactively, then you're in a much safer position to be able to pull off your combo, even though they spent a chunk of their deck trying to shut you down. With black, it's a little bit different. It doesn't have much reactive interaction. It doesn't do well with destroying artifacts or destroying enchantments, or, you know, even in a lot of cases, like destroying, it does well with destroying creatures, but that's not enough. But it does have the proactive removal with hand disruption. And you're going to be hoping for an actual turn 1 play if you go this route for the sideboard. But that's what you're looking to do. You're essentially playing your hatred removal before the opponent has a chance to do it. To play their hatred pieces is what you're looking at. And then I know that a good rule of thumb for building sideboards is that you don't want anything cute in the sideboard. You want actual answers in the sideboard. Unfortunately, I'm really bad at building sideboards, so there is a little bit of an issue with this one. But ultimately, what I'm getting at, the reason I'm choosing to run 3 copies of Eternal Scourge is because it specifically says you may cast Eternal Scourge from exile. The biggest way and the most common way to disrupt the persist combo is before the persist trigger actually happens, getting the creature out of the graveyard into exile. This is like absolutely the most common way to just disrupt persist combo. And ways to do that are with like Relic of Progenitus, Grafdigger's Cage? Soul Guided Lantern, Ley Line of the Void, stuff like that. And your creatures will generally be put into exile based off of that. I'm running Eternal Scourge as a way that if your opponent is definitely playing the exile your graveyard type of hatred to shut down all graveyard decks, you're able to cast this from exile. And it doesn't have persist. It wouldn't work with persist. Now, granted, persist wouldn't work anyway if they're running graveyard hatred. But you can essentially use this as an aristocrat's piece. Specifically with something like Altar Dementia. Because what you could do is you play out Altar Dementia, and then you play out Eternal Scourge. You sacrifice it to the Altar Dementia, forcing them to mill 3 cards, because Eternal Scourge is a 3/3. And then because of their Rest in Peace or Ley Line of the Void or, you know, whatever, this card goes into exile. You cast it from exile for 3 more mana, and you just keep doing that over and over and over again. It's much more of a value piece. It's not an infinite combo. It's not going to win you the game on the spot. But because black doesn't really have answers to deal with your opponent's board, this is the one thing that you can bring in that they weren't exactly equipped to deal with. Because what are they going to do? Path to exile this thing? Send it to exile? You just recast it. So, now, granted, yeah, like I said, Eternal Scourge is a little bit cute, and you're probably better off building something actually heftier in the sideboard, maybe like an Archon of Cruelty or something. But as it stands, I also admit that, like, if you really wanted to go that hard into a black deck like that, first off, you're not even going to be running this force draw package. You're going to be running your entire discard set here, and then you have a brand new 12 spots for actually good black sideboard cards. So, you know, that's not here nor there. I just thought, you know, for the sideboard that I'm running, not only is this relatively budget, like, you know, get rid of the Thoughtseize for the collectives, then you have a budget sideboard that does function as a sideboard, but it does what it needs to do, and it does help the pitfalls of this deck as it's currently built and as you're playing it. Otherwise, I do like running the Cabal Coffers Urborg to Yawgmoth combination there. That one doesn't need any introduction. The reason I like it is because if you can create a lot of mana within one turn, and you are consistently going to be getting that combo even with only 2 Urborgs and 4 Cabals, because of your force card draw aspect of this deck, you're going to be seeing so much more of your deck more consistently that, yeah, you are going to be drawing into these cards, these specific cards, a lot more than you think. But if you get those out and you get to the point where, what are you thinking? Urborg plus 2 Swamps plus Cabal. You tap those. The Cabal makes 4 mana, plus you tap 1 from the last swamp that you have. And then let's say you had a treasure token from Deadly Dispute, and now all of a sudden you just have 6 black mana that you could do whatever you want to. Even with nothing else on the board, that 6 black mana is very easily a Putrid Goblin, Thran Vigil, Alter Dementia, opponent mill your entire library. Just out of the blue. And just that kind of gut-punching, winning in one turn sort of power play, that's another just fun thing to do with this deck. But it's actually viable because, yeah, maybe they have counter spells to shut down your deck and prevent you from playing what you need to play. But if they're tapped out and all of a sudden you can just prove that you can win the game with 6 mana, that's a fun feeling. That's something to live for. But yeah, anyway, ultimately, long story short, Thran Vigil, phenomenal card. Definitely has a home already. Mono black is the way to do it. Plenty of ways to build mono black Persist combo decks. This is my take on it. I think it's just more fun than what you might get out of other ways to build it. But it's definitely not the optimal way to build it. I'm pretty sure people that consistently play black control decks could build a much better brew list than I could on the subject. But here's what I have. This exists. And I think it's a great starter deck. And because Thran Vigil allows mono black Persist to stand on its own, now the gateways are open for green black, white black, and I think potentially blue black to make a comeback. So, thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And pick these up before they spike in price. That's all I'm saying. Alright, have a good one.